Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss a list of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. Today, Tom and I will give our thoughts on the new albums from May 2017, starting with several featured albums we recommend you listen to, a list of honorable mentions, and ending with a few albums we felt that we should not recommend to you guys. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episode sent to your device for your listening pleasure. Want to help Velocities in Music grow? You can. Velocities in Music was founded on the idea of creating an enriching discussion about modern music. Please share Velocities in Music with the music enthusiasts in your life. Together, we can move music discussion forward. Tom, it's been a busy month.
Yeah, it has.
So, a lot of albums came out in May. This month has been kind of a surprising month for me. There weren't a lot of albums I was really looking forward to slated to come out this month, but it's been pretty rewarding.
Yeah, there were a lot of great albums that came out, but I'm with you. You know, a lot of them weren't hugely anticipated for me, but I kind of like that. I like when albums can just come out of nowhere and really blow you away, really impress you. That's what I'm always looking for.
So, last time, we only had like 4 or 5 featured records, and we spent a huge amount of time talking about them, and I think that like they were really big names. There was New Father John Misty, New Gorillaz, New Kendrick, smaller names this time around, and as such, we probably don't have, 10 to 15 minutes to talk about each of the records like we did last month. This month, we're going to have a few more. I think we have 8 featured albums that we'll start off with here. And as we dive into these, we'll give you some high-level thoughts, but these are all just albums that really, I think, grabbed us, and overall, were just a really rewarding listen. So let's get started. Featured albums from May of 2017.
Our first featured album for May 2017 will be Forest Swords, Compassion. This is sample-based electronic ambient music, and I remember listening to the previous Forest Swords album that came out and liking it pretty well, but this one really grabbed me. It's able to remain intriguing without being gimmicky and having variety while maintaining cohesion. Those are really important aspects to me in this kind of music, and in particular, I think when you have anything that's kind of ambient, kind of mood-based, really the production style is going to play just as big a part as the actual compositions. And I think that that's where they really nail it. There's a lot of space, there's a lot of nice mid-range, it feels thick, it feels warm, and I dig that.
And I think that like the coolest thing to me about Compassion was how digital this sounded, but it still retained this somewhat like kind of natural atmosphere and scenery within it. And maybe that's just the name of the band is playing in, like Forest Swords. Here you're taking like something very natural, like a forest, and then combining it with something man-made and metal, like swords. And somehow they're able to capture that in their music. I don't think I've ever heard of an artist whose name captured the music as well as Forest Swords. The one thing that I really liked was just the rhythms that were created in all of these songs. I felt that like this was a very rhythm-based take on kind of this ambient electronica sound, and overall I just couldn't get enough of this album. Our next featured album from May of 2017 is This Old Dog by Mac DeMarco.
This old dog ain't about to forget.
Mac DeMarco is a Canadian singer-songwriter. I classify him as the indie darling of modern, like mid-2010s indie rock. And This Old Dog is his third record. In 2014, was it 2014, 2013, he came out with Salad Days, which I remember really enjoying that album.
Yeah.
There were several tracks on it that just were very poppy and got stuck in your head. And This Old Dog is a little bit of a different record. I feel like this album is one part druggy singer-songwriter and one part hazy synth pop. Mac DeMarco's lazy, nonchalant vocal presence isn't invigorating, but it wasn't designed to be that way. This whole sound was designed to be whimsical and dreamy. I think some of the tracks are really well written and executed, and others kind of less so. And I've come up on this album after a few listens, but while I think that it's a solid record, I don't think I would classify this as one of the best records of the year. The opening track, My Old Man, is fantastic. It's one of my favorite tracks that's come out this year. I don't think Mac DeMarco really knows what identity he wants to portray on This Old Dog. And I think that the disparity between the tracks, some of them being more synth-based and some of them being more acoustic guitar-based, keeps me from really loving this. I would still recommend this album to anyone who likes Mac DeMarco or simply enjoys that chill, whimsical indie rock music vibe.
You know, Jake, there's something about Mac DeMarco that I just have this adverse, like, gag reflex to.
Sure.
And that sounds harsher than I mean it to be. I'm listening to his music is a fine experience. I like him all right. But what I realize really kind of turns me off about him is that, you know, he has a lot of positive messages in his lyrics, which is an aspect that I like.
Yeah.
But the delivery of it is like this, like, slacker rock kind of just, like, a black kind of presentation. And you know what it makes me think of? You know, like back in college, you always find yourself like at some point in your life stuck in a conversation with some stoned dude who's trying to tell you what the meaning of life is and what you should be doing with your time. That's Mac DeMarco. Mac DeMarco is that guy. And somehow it just frustrates me listening to him. And he's just kind of like trying to convey this wisdom, but in this like kind of like, to me, kind of superficial way. And like his songs are fine, but I can't get into it for that reason.
I think that if you're looking for like really heady music that makes you think and ponder life in a different way, Mac DeMarco's probably not that ticket, but like what he's really good for is putting something on that you can just kind of relax to, and be a little bit introspective, but not like overly committed to.
I can get behind that.
Which, to be candid, like that's not really my thing, but I can see the appeal and appreciate it.
Next up, we've got the new Perfume Genius album, No Shape.
Baby, let all them voices slip away.
Perfume Genius is the musical project of Mike Hadreas. And this album, if you've listened to Perfume Genius's previous couple albums, this has a much bigger and more expansive sound than those did. And I think it really works. At times it even sounds more like Anthony and the Johnsons or even Juju with some of the more synth-driven moments. And it has as many of those big synth-driven moments as the delicate, heartfelt ones that you might be used to from this artist. I think Mike Hadreas is really proving himself to be an upper-class songwriter and performer on this one.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think No Shape certainly feels a lot more optimistic than previous Perfume Genius albums. And the thing that I really loved, and Tom, you were speaking to this a little bit, but it's just overflowing with ideas and sound. It fully embraces an indie pop influence and injects life into Perfume Genius's typical morose sound. On No Shape, we get a huge electronic beats, just walls of synth layers and keys, and thick layers of vibratoed vocals. There are still lots of moments on this album that embrace the depressing, but those seem to carry more impact on this record since it's not the only style of track that you're hearing. I'll be coming back to this one pretty frequently throughout the rest of the year. Our next featured album is Slowdive. Slowdive. Slowdive is an English shoegaze band. I would classify them as like this is pretty just
classic shoegaze. They help define the genre.
Yeah,
really.
and reading about Slowdive in this album, like they don't really. Not a lot of people are saying like explicitly like they're a shoegaze band. They're like, oh, it's rock music. Well, what does that mean? Like, if I had to like put this in any one subgenre, it's shoegaze. Anyways, this is their first album in like 22 years, and it's self-titled, and which I really like when bands do that. They're totally pulling an MBV.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to describe this album besides the slow, brooding shoegaze with haunting, reverb-soaked vocals and really, really thick production. This is a 46-minute album, and it has 8 tracks, and every second of that playtime, in my opinion, is warranted. Slowdive packing great songwriting and instrumental performances to each of these tracks. This album is overflowing with austere, introspective mood and atmosphere. The vocals really hit the spot. They are mixed just right to complement the guitars and backing instruments while providing just the right amount of pop hook to make the songs memorable and connect everything in the mix together. For me, this album was incredibly addictive. I just want to keep listening to it, and I find myself putting it on whenever I'm looking for something to listen to.
You know, Jake, I know that this is a featured album and maybe I should chime in with something, but I really don't have anything to add. I really liked it a lot as well for all the same reasons you mentioned. It was just a solid one, and I really think everyone should be digging this. Next album is the Afghan Whigs in Spades. Another band from the 90s that's still coming out with great music. We got quite a few that fit into that category on our featured albums list today, Jake. I actually just realized that. But Afghan Whigs in Spades, I think that this is a terrific album. I really started to love it on second listen. It took me a couple listens to really dig into just because it's so diverse. It's terrifically diverse, in fact. With just strong performances, complex arrangements, but they never feel overdone. A couple things that I really like in particular about this record is just the amount of varied instrumentation that they work into the mix. There's a lot going on, a lot of different instruments that they're incorporating into the sound, but then also the vocalist, he's still got it. He just finds a way to work with whatever tone the song is setting, and so, you know, being that it's the same guy the whole time helps to create consistency, but then him being able to adapt to the songs really provides that variety. So I think it's just a really great execution.
Yeah, one thing I would add is that In Spades, I think, is a little bit poppier in the songwriting, but without sacrificing that rock edge. And I think, Tom, to your point, most of the edge in the sound can be attributed to the vocals. Their vocalist has just this fantastically interesting voice, and he sings with such gusto that it really sells the track and provides that necessary intensity for the instrumentation to follow suit. You hear a ton of electric guitar, but also a fair amount of auxiliary instrumentation like piano and strings to back the sound. And this makes it a very varied sound palette that complements a grand outdoor stage. If they were ever to play outside, I'd really want to go see it. I really dug this record. I think it warrants multiple listens to unwrap all of the sonic layers. Next up, we have Oxbow with Thin Black Duke. Oxbow is a San Francisco-based experimental rock band, and this album is actually the first I've heard of them.
Yeah, same here.
There really isn't a lot of stuff right now being released that sounds like this. I even get a pretty solid grunge vibe. The gruff, almost drunken male vocals give this an authenticity and intensity that complements the sludgy, distorted guitars really well. I was really digging the sound.
Yeah, when I put this on, I couldn't believe that I hadn't heard this band before because they're right up my alley. When I was reading about them, I saw some comparisons to like the Jesus Lizard. I definitely agree with that. I even got a little bit of Dinosaur Jr. in the sound. But you mentioned the vocalist, Jake, sounding kind of drunken and crazed. I think he sounds kind of like a crazed Eddie Vedder. But the instrumentals at times, they even give off a vibe of early post-rock from like the mid-90s, along the lines of like Don Caballero's, wow, I butchered that. Don Caballero, however the hell you pronounce their band name. Their kind of slower songs are like some stuff from Tortoise's first album, because those instruments really provide some atmosphere, but then are still able to bring in the intensity as well. I love the spacious, raw yet clear production style, and also some of the horn and string touches. I just thought this was a really well done album. All right, now we have yet another album that's kind of a return from a band we haven't heard in a long time, At the Drive-In with Interalia.
That's how you say it.
I think
I was saying Interalia in my head.
Maybe it is.
Interalia. Let's go with yours.
Okay. You're putting a lot of pressure on me. I might be wrong, man.
No, I might be wrong in my head.
Well, we needed a Radiohead
token
reference.
Radiohead reference.
All right. So, At the Drive-In's new album, this is not getting a whole lot of love. I'm apparently in the minority for thinking this is actually a pretty damn strong return for these guys. Not perfect, but very strong. They take bits of what they've learned from their other projects, namely Mars Volta and Sparta, and incorporate that into something that still sounds true to the band's original style and attitude. Now, that said, I do have a couple major gripes that I think holds this album back. The lesser of the two being the production. The guitars are very mid-rangey. They don't really crunch, and while I understand that that's part of the punk-rooted aesthetic that keeps the band sounding authentic, I can't help but think that the album would sound better with snappier drums, thicker guitars, and more well-defined bass. It all just kind of bleeds together a bit. The larger problem, though, to me, is that the first 4 or 5 songs are the clear highlights to me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And the rest of the album is kind of a retread of similar style points, just done at a lower level of quality. This is the number one thing that will hold back an album for me. If there's not going to be much diversity, then the quality needs to remain consistent for every track. Without that, the album dilutes itself, and I think Interalia is actually guilty of that a little bit. Now, I will say, the last track I actually loved. I thought that was an explosive, hard-hitting track, and I kind of wish the rest of the album had that kind of burgeoning energy, but it did at times, but I just don't feel like the sound really came to fruition.
Yeah, overall, I would say that this is a really solid release, and like the notes that I took, to me, it was about what kept this from being considered one of the great albums of the year so far.
Yeah.
For me anyways. And because I think that when you look at what they're presenting here, it's the pretty classic At the Drive-In sound. But I do think that several facets took a step down, but you still have that driving energy, that kind of, which is kind of from that punk influence. This thing just rocks your ass off the whole time. But I definitely agree with you, Tom, about your complaint regarding the production. And I think it adds on to my biggest complaint about Interalia, or however you pronounce this, which is the utter lack of dynamics. At the Drive-In seem very unconcerned about adding any dynamics to these songs, and the result is that the choruses are just less impactful than they should be. You'll get through a chorus and then have a quick 4-bar transition into the verse and almost no change in the intensity. It just makes all the music blend together in one hot, underproduced, loud mess. And I think it takes away from some of the great instrumental performances that are present on nearly every track here. Not to mention, it prevents Cedric from being able to reach his full proven potential as a vocalist by forcing him into a very specific vocal range and volume. Like I said, I think this is a really good record, but it's just far from perfect. Our last featured album from May of 2017 is the 7th album from Canadian post-rock band Do Make Say Think. This one's called Stubborn Persistent Illusions. This is spacious, artsy post-rock that succeeds in melody as well as mood, and one core element of the sound on Stubborn Persistent Illusions is the use of electronic keys, usually only in a single chord play for 4 counts on repeat, and it helps ground the sound of this foundation so the guitars and bass can swirl, and so that they can build on the dynamic contrast by layering in other washy electronic layers. The whole sound sounds entirely digital and processed, yet it has an organic charm to it, mostly because of the clean production on the electric guitar. I really dug this record. If I have any beef with the album, it's that I think it's just a little unjustifiably long at 60 minutes. I felt like the front half was stronger than the back half.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And the main thing you said that I want to emphasize is that organic charm, because I feel like post-rock today, it's starting to get more and more overcompressed and thick as the style kind of evolves. And I really think that post-rock is a genre that does best when there's a little bit of space and a little bit of breathing room in the tracks, a little bit of separation between the instrumentals. And I think Do Make Say Think really nail that on this album. I love that spacious aspect of the sound. But, you're right. It probably is a little bit long, but so far for me, this is probably one of the better albums to come out this year. All right, Jake, we're moving on to our honorable mentions.
So honorable.
Very honorable. All of these albums display maximum amounts of honor. Anyway, the first one we're going to start with here is Logic, Everybody.
To the back, not accepted by the black or the white. I don't give a fuck, praise God, I can see the light. Everybody talk about race this, race that. I wish I could erase that, face facts. Everybody, people.
Logic, hip-hop artist, put out an album a couple years ago called The Incredible True Story that Jake, you and I really liked. And this one, well, while that was kind of a sci-fi concept album, this one is more social and kind of philosophical in nature. Logic is putting his candid thoughts on social issues and race tension as the focus of this LP. And with an album so focused on message, it's easy to let the rest of the music take a back seat. But Logic doesn't really fall into that trap. The beats have a lot to offer. There's plenty of intrigue in the sound, with a similar lack of reliance on poppy chorus hooks as his previous LP. I don't like this album quite as much as the last one, but the quality of sound, Logic's delivery is still all there. At times, though, I did feel like the album suffers a little bit for the message just during those kind of like God conversation interludes, which go on for quite a while. I understand that these parts are probably the whole point of the album to Logic, but for the listener, I think it breaks things up a little bit. Still a really great album, though.
Next up, we have Juana Molina with her new album, Halo. This is experimental electronic music with some pop undertones. Juana Molina's music is all about mixing layered electronic elements with off-cadence rhythms and beats. On top of that, she provides her reverbed, haunting vocals in Spanish. And like her 2013 effort, Wed 21, you can hear a high level of craft that went into creating Halo. Every song is purposefully constructed, with each new layer building on the layer before it, building to nice climaxes with Molina's vocals belting out over top. The result is some of the most strangely unique soundscapes you'll hear all year, and while Halo lacks a few of the killer tracks that would take this album to the next level, I still think it's a solid effort.
Next is Moon Duo with Occult Architecture Volume 2. If you recall, Volume 1 came out earlier this year, and I actually like Volume 2 quite a bit better. It's a little more rocking, has some great grooves on it, though. Reminds me a little bit of like Primal Scream in the fact that it's a little bit dancey, but still kind of rock music. Pretty good, but not really amazing.
Next up, we have Blondie with Pollinator. I find that older, tenured bands still putting out albums in their third or fourth decade often still find a way to maintain their energy, but have lost something in their songwriting. On Pollinator, I find that Blondie is doing the opposite. Some of these songs are actually pretty darn solid, but the performances feel tired and worn. If these exact songs had been put out by Blondie in the late 70s, it would have been a great Blondie record. Long Time jumps out as a great track, but then Best Day Ever and When I Gave Up on You are difficult to get through.
Next we have John Moreland with Big Bad Luv.
I've seen my seasons change. I was crying out your name. Remember when we used to feel.
This is country Americana rock. This album sounds pretty good, but it's not really something I get into. If that's a style that you dig, I think John Moreland's doing it pretty well, but I didn't really have anything raving to say about this one.
Next up, we have the self-named release from English singer-songwriter Harry Styles, called Harry Styles.
Just stop your crying, it'll be alright. They told me that the end is near.
So this solo debut is an album that will be hard to find an objective opinion about. On one side, you'll have people who are more impressed than they should be simply because they had a very low expectations as a former member of One Direction and are pleasantly surprised by the fact that it's listenable at all. On the other hand, you have people who will write it off merely because it's Harry Styles and unfairly look for reasons to hate it. I lean more towards the first category, but biases aside, I think it's hard to argue against some of the more mature and artistic qualities on the album. It even feels more singer-songwriter than it does pop, and the feelings exhibited don't feel contrived or superficial. Hell, Carolina even sounds like Paul Simon. In fact, I find myself more impressed by the arrangements than I do the vocal performances, which is high praise for an artist who before now was really only known for being a pretty voice.
Next album is Pwr Bttm with Pageant. This album is overflowing with creative pop ideas, but it makes for an inconsistent listen. Some of these songs are very attention-grabbing and legitimately great songs, while others feel kind of pointless in comparison. I don't feel like these guys are able to hone those ideas enough to create a true album. It's just a slather of ideas. Unfortunately, the only thing I find consistent is my dislike for the vocals. I just don't think they're performed well, although some of the parts are pretty well written. Now, that actually sounds like a lot of negative commentary for an album that we're putting in our honorable mention category. Sure. But those are my main gripes. I actually think these guys are doing some pretty cool things.
Next, we have Jim Jones and the Righteous Mind with Supernatural. This sounds like if you took a blues rock band, dragged them through the mud, and forced their vocalist to eat gravel, and then put them in a scuzzy biker bar to perform for 5 years. And in no way are any of those things bad, but at the same time, there's something about the production and presentation on this record that feels a little unfocused, and that really prevents this album from packing the wallop it should. It kind of feels a lot like Alice Cooper, and I was never a big fan of Alice Cooper, but overall, this is a decent record.
Next up, we have the new album from Paul Weller, A Kind Revolution. It's really cool to see the Jam frontman come back with a really strong rebirth of his career in the 2000s with a slew of like 4 albums that have been really good. And this is just really artfully done with great attention to detail. Terrific layering in the instrumentals as well as the vocals and diverse song structures. For some reason, I don't find these songs really pulling me in or sticking with me, but I also still think this is probably Paul Weller's best album since Wake Up the Nation.
Next honorable mention is Girlpool with Powerplant.
Tell me you are here. I know I'll find you. Static somewhere.
This is 90s era indie rock smelling of bands like Pavement or Yola Tango with female vocals. Driven by clean electric guitar and moving bass lines, the sound is true to indie rock form. I really enjoy the songwriting too. It's simple yet tactful. This album lacks greatness and scope, but what it set out to do, it definitely accomplishes.
Next up is the new album from the Mountain Goats, Goths.
There's a whole new world just up around the corner. We do it different on the West Coast. We do it different on the West Coast.
This is one of the most comfortable Mountain Goats albums I've heard in a long time. John Darnielle is still packing a lot of feeling into his songs, but in a subtle way rather than a soul-bearing confessional way. I love that this album explores the nuances of subculture in such a heartfelt way, making them relatable even if you're far from being a part of them, and hell, even if Darnielle is far from being a part of them. The theming ties the album together really well without it feeling like a restrictive concept album, but while still creating some consistency in the lyrical themes and all that. I really dug this one.
Next, we have Jane Weaver with Modern Kosmology. This is female-led experimental pop in the same vein as St. Vincent, but with a little bit more restraint. Jane Weaver's songs on Modern Kosmology feel constructed. They revolve around a central idea and build and grow. She uses crafted electric guitar chords and drums to provide the sonic foundation, then adds flourishes through colorful use of strings. Overall, I enjoy the sound of this record and definitely want to come back to it.
Next up is Don Bryant, Don't Give Up on Love. This is old school soul along the lines of what we've heard recently from Charles Bradley, or rather the album from last year that he put out. But it's less funky, more on the pop kind of blues side of things. If this is a style you're into, definitely check this out. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's a style that I wish more people were writing today, so it's cool to see people like Don Bryant keeping it alive.
Next, we have Paramore, After Laughter. The cadence of that album title. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Almost like it rhymes.
And it's almost like it's a Hinky Pinky.
Oh, it is.
It is
it's
After
Pinky.
Laughter, yeah. Paramore go total new wave on this album, and while it's much poppier and less rocking than some of their previous material, it's pretty good pop songwriting, honestly. There are still some forgettable tracks, so I'm not big on it as a whole, but it's pretty good.
And now we have the second Sun Kill Moon album for this year. This is Sun Kill Moon and Jesu, 30 Seconds to the Decline of Planet Earth.
Disney World. I said sure. Next morning we went to the airport. You saw me play my show.
Pretty heavy album title. And this is another 80 or so minutes of Mark Kozlik sharing life stories and his thoughts on random people who have died. I like that this is a bit more focused than the one that came out a few months ago, and I like the more ambient, spaced-out sound. Still, this is something I can listen to once and enjoy, but after that, I feel like I've kind of gotten everything out of it that I can.
This guy just writes constantly. His diary is his music. Sometimes it's word vomit, sometimes it's poetry atop of musical genius, but most of the time it's just okay. Next up, we have Pumarosa with The Witch. This is jammy, psychedelic music with a strong 80s gothic dream pop influence, and I found this to be really hit or miss depending on the track. Some tracks exemplified great patience in the songwriting, letting the tracks build nicely through creative ideas, but others meandered into nothingness for minutes and minutes, and overall, I think I like this album, but I'm not totally sold on it.
Next up is Aldous Harding with her album Party. This is a very artsy female singer-songwriter with mostly just acoustic guitar and vocals, but occasionally other instrumental layers added in as well. Aldous Harding's vocal inflection is unique. It feels a little overwrought at times and rubs me the wrong way every now and then, but it's also one of the things that makes the album diverse and makes it stick out amongst other music that's coming out today. So whether you dig it will really depend on if you can embrace those odd qualities in the vocals. I would liken it to like Joanna Newsom. If you like Joanna Newsom's vocal stylings, then check this one out because it's something that you'll probably be intrigued by.
Next we have Nick Hakim with Green Twins. This is very murky modern R&B like Bilal or Gabriel Garzón Montano. And if it was produced by something like Ariel Pink. To me, I think that the production here added an authenticity to the sound that actually enhanced the overall listening experience. I personally feel that R&B and hip-hop benefit from a more lo-fi production style, as most artists in this genre tend to overproduce their music. This just felt fairly intimate and natural.
Yeah, I actually think I like this a little bit less than you, Jake, but for the same reasons. I think we're identifying the same thing in here, but I actually found the production style to be a little bit distracting and not really enhancing the songwriting, so I think that's really going to be the make or break for whether people like this one or not. And now we have Land of Talk's new album, Life After Youth. This is dreamy indie rock with a similar aesthetic to like Wye Oak, but a little bit poppier songwriting. The quality of the songs, though, definitely exceeds the sheer style appeal, which makes this an album worth digging into. I really find myself pulled into these songs. There's just this hypnotic electric guitar fingerings, harmonized vocals that really invite you to just dig deeper into the sound. I think they did a great job with this one.
This next album is probably the most honorable of our honorable mentions.
So honorable.
It was so honorable. We almost included this as a feature album. This is Sandy, in parenthetical there, Alex G, and the album is called Rocket. I would describe the sound as delicate indie singer-songwriter with tinges of country and psychedelia. The music on Rocket shows an eclectic amalgamation of influences, with vocals sounding reminiscent of Elliott Smith and instrumentation closer to that of the Avett Brothers and sometimes a more lo-fi progressive lens of Animal Collective. These guys are trying to do something that is truly their own, and I really appreciate the approach. Rocket runs the gamut of genre and intensity, providing a smorgasbord-style album listening experience. These guys succeeded at pulling me into their music, but they did so by sacrificing the cohesive album album listening experience. Still, I'm intrigued, and I enjoyed this record, so it's just a minor complaint.
Next album is Wavves, You're Welcome. I actually like this one a lot more than pretty much any other Wavves album I've heard. The production style and details of the mix actually help to make the songs more intriguing and provide some contrast between tracks so that they don't all sound the same, but still work together. A lot of the songwriting approach is similar to past Wavves albums, but the instrumental approach backing the songs is more multidimensional and varied than we've heard yet.
Next up, we have a new record from Justin Townes Earle, Kids in the Street.
Think about it, but baby, don't take too much time. Maybe only
Came out with another one in 2015, and it was a double album, and I couldn't handle it. But this one I actually made it through and liked it pretty well. It's singer-songwriter and country with a heavy focus on Justin Townes Earle's vocals. The songwriting is pretty straightforward. These are really simple songs focusing on Earle's charm and lyrical wit, and I'm not going to lie, this is pretty decent. I would enjoy this as background music at a folksy farm-to-table sort of restaurant, but would I buy this on vinyl and sit down and give it a detailed listen? Probably not.
Yeah. You know, Justin Townes Earle he came through here performing pretty recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was just in town.
That was terrible.
Next up, we have Pokey LaFarge with Manic Revelations.
Gonna be a ride in the streets tonight. Gonna be a ride in the streets.
Pokey LaFarge nails the late 50s, early 60s rock sound perfectly, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. The performances and arrangements are spot on, but as can be expected, there's not a lot new to bring to the table when it comes to the songwriting, so I feel like Pokey falls a little bit into novelty territory, even if the execution is perfect.
Next, we have The Charlatans with Different Days.
Just couldn't say what it takes to make you love. What it takes to make
If you like Britpop or British Invasion or anything in that realm of music, you will probably like this. This isn't the most original sound in the world. They really aren't doing anything particular great in the songwriting, but I'm not completely bored with it. I found it to be pretty enjoyable.
All right, our last honorable mention for the month of May 2017 is The Heliocentrics, A World of Masks. I would describe this album as groovy, dreamy, and tribal, like a mix of albums we've gotten over the last couple of years from Khruangbin and Goat. It's jazzy and funky, but in a primal and dark way with a lot of atmosphere and then some seductive female vocals that come in and out of the mix. I really like the sound of this record, but by the end I felt fairly unmoved by it. I think the main reason for this is that while I like the sound, it's quite homogeneous and unchanging throughout the album.
That concludes our list of honorable mentions from May of 2017, and now we have just a few albums that we would classify as not recommended for you guys that we'll go through our quick reasons as to why. First off, Kasabian, For Crying Out Loud.
She looked cold, I said it's alright. Come with me and fight the good fight.
Their album title is how I felt listening to this. This is bland party rock that is pretending to be less mainstream than what it is. Basic songwriting with lackluster melodies, big, overproduced beats. Everything sounds like it has been engineered to sound like it should be played in a swanky sports bar, and I just really wasn't digging it.
Our next not recommended album is Black Lips, Satan's Graffiti or God's Art. This is more of the druggy, distorted neo-psychedelia that you get from Black Lips. I'm really not a fan of the vocals. They're kind of lackadaisical and don't really match the instrumental performances. And in the past, I've liked these guys' style pretty well, but on this one, the songs just don't do much for me.
Our next not recommended album, Pond, The Weather. This is fuzzy, dreamy psych pop. Big drum beats produced in the red, overwashing synths and twinkling guitars. The whimsical vocals get lost in the ethereal sound. This is just okay, but Pond really isn't bringing anything new to the table, and these guys' songs never get to the point that I really feel engaged. It's just very lackluster.
And our last not recommended album and last album for this wrap-up is Jaylin with Black Origami. This very glitchy, treble-focused electronica. I really don't like this kind of electronica. The thinness of the individual beat components leaves too much space, and there's hardly any mid-range in the mix to provide any warmth or fullness. This one's just not for me.
Tom, we had more featured albums this month than in several previous months,
Yeah.
and less albums that we didn't recommend. I think
Yeah, it was a strong month,
Yeah,
man.
this really was a strong month, and of those 4 albums that we didn't recommend that we highlighted there, I think one of them I liked a little bit more than you, and one that you liked a little bit more than me. Like it was borderline honorable mention for one of us, and we had several honorable mentions that I think were borderline like featured album
For
worthy.
sure, yeah.
Now, and something just to throw out some thoughts on this, like sometimes when we pick like Mac DeMarco, I don't think that either Tom and I were really strong on this month, but it was an album that we feel has so much attention on it right now that we didn't want to not cover it, so we wanted to give it our time and thoughts. It obviously, when an album has a lot of buzz around it, I think it deserves some attention from us, or at least I feel that way. I don't know about you, Tom.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
But Mac DeMarco certainly fit that bill. So thinking back on this awesome month of music, Tom, what were 3 records that really stood out to you?
My 3 favorites, I'm going to go with Rocket by Sandy Alex G. Do Make Say Think, Stubborn Persistent Illusions. Just great to hear some really diverse, fresh sounding post-rock. And then I'm going to go with Oxbow, Thin Black Duke. You know, a surprise from a band that I feel like I should have known but didn't. So a good entry into their work. I'm definitely going to dig into them some more.
My 3, Slowdive with their self-titled Return album, Perfume Genius, their new one with No Shape, and then the Afghan Whigs with In Spades. Those are my 3 favorites this month. My least favorite album that I would wish I had that time back is Kasabian, for crying out loud.
Yeah, and that's one I liked a little bit more than you, but my least favorite is definitely Jaylin. Just, you know, I'm as I listen to more electronica, I'm getting more particular about what I like in it, and that one just did not cut it for me.
You listeners out there, what were your favorite albums from May? Are there any albums that we missed that you think we should cover later? Let us know. And if you like any of the tracks that you heard us use in this podcast, you can listen to a Spotify playlist of the songs we use by searching for VIM May 2017 New Album Wrap-Up in Spotify. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, your Facebook messages, and your emails to us. Your participation is what makes Velocities in Music possible, so as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music, moving music discussion forward.